Okay. Welcome everyone. My name is Skyler Robinson. I am the Public Services Coordinator up in Young Adult, and I am actually from Cortland. So that is why I am doing this discussion, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Skyler. My name is Benz. I'm the author of Nothing But the Dirt, Stories from an American Farm Town, and now aficionado of rural Kansas.
I love that. Okay, starting off, can you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, sure. So to give you some context into why I wrote this book, how this book even came about. So at the time I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I got my hands on the book Blue Highways by William Lease T. Moon, which is all about just traveling on the back roads of America and staying off the interstates. And I just fell in love with this idea. So in 2013, my son came home from high school and was like, Mom, I want to go to University of Colorado at Boulder. We had never even been to Colorado. I'm like, okay. So he applied, got accepted, and the idea was I would drive him out in our little red Fiat, using the interstates, obviously, to get out to Colorado. But on the way back, I was going to do my Blue Highways road trip. So I had no GPS, no hotel reservations, I had a map, and I knew that home was east. And I got on Highway 36 in Kansas, and that's how I literally stumbled upon Cortland. But what I love so much about this story is, initially, I blew by it. Because if you're familiar with Highway 36, most of the small towns sit on the highway, so they're really easy to get to. By the time I was approaching Cortland, it was like Saturday afternoon, sun's blazing, I'm tired. So I kind of just like blew by it. So I was like, it's not on the highway, it's gonna take too much effort to get there. And I kid you not, it was like I heard an audible voice say, turn around. And I ignored it, and I heard it again, turn around. And so I was like, okay. So I pulled a U-E, and that's when I drove that mile-long stretch that you know well into Cortland, which is when like something just started hooking itself in me. I started falling in love with this town I hadn't even seen yet. And then by 2017, it dawned on me like, I love this town so much, and I'm a writer, why am I not writing a story about it?
I love that so much, especially just because you're right, like it's a mile into Cortland. And so
yeah, it takes like
why
effort.
go that mile?
Yeah.
Why do that?
Yeah.
I also love, of course, it's rural Kansas, so you can just do a U-turn on the highway.
Which
That's
I
no
love.
big deal.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, no one in front of me, no one bothering me.
Yeah. Nobody noticed that day.
No one even noticed.
No. You probably got into town and it was empty streets and you're like, ah.
Totally.
Yeah.
The only thing that was open was Antiques, which is this half antique shop, half lunch cafe. And I just kind of waltzed on in, and there's an older gentleman sitting at the table, and we started chatting, and he said, you're a writer? We have a newspaper here. I'm like, you're kidding. Like, this small little town has this weekly newspaper? What? Being a writer, and at the time I was writing for a major metro paper back in Pittsburgh, and we were getting ready to shutter, really. We weren't gonna be printing anymore, and so it was phenomenal to me that like a big city paper couldn't make it, yet this small town had this weekly newspaper.
Every week.
Every week. Amazing.
Yeah. So you said this was your first time in Hayes, and I know when I moved to Hayes like 10 years ago almost, I was amazed to be in the big city. I was like, wow, they have a stoplight, they have a Walmart, this is incredible.
Yeah, really.
But now I've been here for so long, I actually think Hayes is pretty small. Like I tell people all the time, it's a really tiny town.
Yeah.
I'm just from a smaller town. So how do the two compare? You've spent a few days in Hayes now. Does it compare to Cortland at all for you? What do you think?
It's such a great question. It does. I think Hayes and Cortland have a lot in common in the sense that there's just something that makes each of these towns special. When you walk down Main Street on Hayes, in fact, my parents and I, who are visiting from Dallas, we were all commenting like, there's a lot going on here for a smaller town, and it's great to see like these vibrant businesses instead of just shuttered buildings, which is similar to what they've done in Cortland.
Yeah. So if you haven't been to Cortland, it is a small town of 285 people. It's pretty small. Sorry. Oh, and so it's surrounded by a lot of small areas. So there's Scandia, there's Mankato, there's Republic. And Cortland had the elementary school and the middle school, and then Scandia has the high school. So I probably spent equal time in both towns. Like I would say everybody that lives in Cortland has spent an equal amount of time in the other small towns. So my question is, why Cortland? Like why not Mankato or Scandia or Republic? What spoke to you?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. And so what I like to equate it to is kind of similar to when you're dating somebody, right? Like sometimes you jive with that person and sometimes you don't. And I think that also happens when we travel. If you think about it, sometimes you've been to a place where you're like, yes, this feels amazing. And other times it's like, yeah, it's great, but pass. So Cortland for me was kind of like, I think that perfect, I liked it enough and it liked me enough that we just kind of jived, because I like to say I found my geographical soulmate. I mean, I love this town.
That will always amaze me. It really will. So what made you decide to write a whole book about Cortland instead of a news article or even a Facebook post or something?
Yeah, well, my idea started out as just getting enough material to write a short story I could pitch to a magazine. So in 2017, so again, I first came upon Cortland in 2013, and then subsequent trips to visit Justin, my son, in Colorado, I'd always just stop in Cortland. So from those stops, I became acquainted with Mr. Manquist, who runs the newspaper, and Luke Mahan, who ran economic development at the time. Other than that, I knew no one. So I thought, there's just something about this town. I want to write this great story. I'll pitch it to a magazine. So I took some vacation time from Pittsburgh, went to Cortland after 5 days of just like literally, hey, I'm Kate Benz. I'm writing a story about your town. And people were like, what? And just being gracious enough to talk to this, crazy person chasing them with a pen and a notepad. When I left after 5 days, I had a manuscript of 20,000 words, which is basically a quarter of a way to a book. And that's when I realized, oh, this isn't going to be a magazine article. Like, let's just go for it and write a book.
So what was your process after you decided to write that book? I know you said you went back a few times, so.
I did. I became like the boomerang, which when I send like thank you cards or birthday cards to my friends in Cortland, I sign it the boomerang and they know exactly who it is. So because I was living in Pittsburgh, I basically just allocated vacation time. So I would come out to Cortland for like 5 to 7 days and talk to as many people as I possibly could, get home, write their story, and then talk to the next person. So that's how it kind of like unfolded. It was really just word of mouth. As people heard I was writing this book, they actually were eager to talk to me, which was awesome. I didn't have to force my way into anyone's home or lurk in the bushes. They were pretty open from the get-go.
Yeah. I think the thing about Cortland is everybody there is just so proud of Cortland.
Yeah.
And so they just want to talk about it.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I love that you said that, because I think that's what contributes to like the soul, if you will, of the town. These are people that they love their community, and they will never, ever, ever let anything negative keep them down, put them down. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. So a lot of your book featured Pinky's, which was kind of one of the lone restaurants in Cortland at the time. And I worked at Pinky's until when I could work, until I graduated, I was at Pinky's almost every single day. So I know those coffee drinkers you wrote about and all of those regular customers. And I also know those coffee drinkers love to gossip.
Oh, yes.
They have so much gossip. They are worse than women.
They're way worse than women.
And so I just want to know what stories didn't make it into the book. Like, what gossip did you get about Cortland? Yeah.
Ooh. You know what? Surprisingly, I did not get a lot of gossip. There was certainly, like, as a writer, you will hopefully get to a point as you're talking with people that you can tell they're starting to relax. And that's when they start to really open up. And that's when they also tend to forget that you're taking notes. And I think I went into this knowing like that's a pretty big responsibility. I have no interest in exploiting that. Like, even if they tell me a juicy story, it's not going to go in the book. So I was pretty adamant about, if I am told any gossip, it is for my ears only. I'm not telling Skyler 4 years later. So yeah, I did hear a couple things, but for the most part, it was more about them and their lives. And like I said, while at times they did really go deep and share some private things, you kind of instinctively know, like, even when they're not saying like, don't put that in the book, that's not something that's appropriate for the book.
I love that you protected them and protected that town.
I wanted them to let me back in.
Yeah, of course, of course. So how does, it sounds like you spent some time in rural Kansas. How does it compare to where you're from?
Ooh, well, my husband and I now live in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and we are in the boonies. We are out there. So Cortland was like my gateway drug to really wanting to live rurally. I love that idea because at the time living in Pittsburgh, it was wonderful, and I was actually writing the society column for the Pittsburgh paper. So my job was to go to like the fancy parties and, you know, have a great meal and drink champagne and then write about the who's who, and that was so much fun. But after a while, it's like, is there more here? You know, is there more here? And just realizing like, yeah, you have all the conveniences of living in a big city, but should it take 40 minutes to go 5 miles? Like, should life be this complex? And just wanting that beautiful simplicity of just everything I need is here, and if it's not here, I probably don't need it. So to get back to your question, it's pretty darn similar. I think we're even more remote though, because where we are, we're about 40 miles from like a legit town that has a Walmart. Mm-hmm. So we're out there.
The same.
Yeah.
Okay, and then while you were in Cortland, and especially just rural towns in general, what sense of community do you get? Like, do you feel safe?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So Luke, the director of economic development, once said to me, like, if you leave your car doors unlocked in Cortland, the only thing you're going to be threatened with is your neighbor putting cucumbers in the front seat. Like, and what shocked me was almost nobody. I mean, they don't lock their doors, but 90% of them don't even know where the house key is anymore because it's like, why would I lock the door? So that was fascinating, and that definitely has seeped into my life. Living in the boondocks now, I shouldn't be saying this because my mother's here. I always lock the door when I leave the house. But no, I love that it's just a safe place. And they all look out for each other. And it kind of reminds me of like when I was growing up, if you did something wrong, like the neighbor was going to tell your mom. And you're going to get in trouble. And that's still how it is in Cortland.
Oh, yeah. Every time I got in trouble, everybody knew.
See? They all you were like the big juicy topic of gossip back. I should be writing a book about you, I think.
People in Pinkies knew before my mom knew.
I believe that.
She didn't like that.
Pinkies was like the epicenter of all communication.
Yes.
In fact, if I could tell this story real quick related to that, one of the characters in the book that is now passed, he at one time was out in the fields and he flipped his side-by-side. He did not call 911. He called Pinkies because he knew there'd be somebody there that could help get him out.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. Okay, so I hear all the time that small communities are dying, small town is dying.
Yeah.
But I live in Hayes, and Hayes is thriving to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm from Cortland, and Cortland is thriving to me.
Totally.
So what do you think makes the difference? Like, why are these towns thriving versus other towns are dying? What makes it Portland unique?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think that it ultimately comes down to what people think they're capable of. I mean, really, on like a micro level, if you think you can, you will. If you think you can, you won't. And Cortland, and it sounds like Hayes too, just has that like can-do attitude. You know, these are people that care about their community and they want to do whatever they can, and they're not afraid to reinvent and pivot and change and just try things. You know, you can feel that sense of like hopelessness sometimes when you go through a smaller town where buildings are shuttered, and it's like, why people aren't trying, I don't know. But I do believe that it literally takes one person to just try it. What's the worst that can happen? It might fail. Who cares? You tried. But if that person succeeds, and even maybe in their failure, they will still inspire somebody else to try, and then it's like a domino effect.
Yeah, I love that. I think the thing about Cortland too is, I mean, there's opportunity there for the people that want it, and everybody wants to see Cortland succeed.
Yeah.
And so if somebody goes to Luke Manton. It's like, I want to do this. He's going to be like, okay, let's get that done.
Yeah, I love that you said that because absolutely, they are all, there's like not a sense of competition. There's a sense of like, I want to help you as much as I possibly can. And everybody does that. I mean, where do you see that these days?
Yeah. Nowhere that I know.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Portland.
Yeah, in Cortland. Go to Cortland. Okay, so you wrote a few chapters about our mayor, our previous mayor of Portland. And growing up, our mayor was just this kind of quirky guy that would just ride around on his golf cart, and he wore Hawaiian shirts all the time.
All the time still.
All the time, yeah. And I just think those quirky characters exist in small town America. And we read about it all the time, but they really are there. I can think of people in Hayes that I think have that like quirky small town charm. And so do you have anybody from your hometown that reminds you of that? Anybody quirky? And
I have a super cool lady. So one of the hot spots in our area is the store where you get your chainsaw blade sharpened. And so we'll go down there to get our blade sharpened. And the one day, now, keep in mind, I've never operated a chainsaw in my life, so my baby chainsaw is like the tiniest one available. It's probably really appropriate for weed whacking, but it sounds impressive when I tell people I have a chainsaw, but it's very, very tiny with a 12-inch, they call it a rod. It's the blade size. So I'm going down to the chainsaw sharpening store to get my chainsaw blade sharpened, feeling like, yeah, I've arrived. And I'm standing behind this woman, and she's about 85, and she's got this gas-powered, massive chainsaw in her hands, and mine's battery operated, so when I turn it on, it's like... And I know, we all know what gas-powered chainsaws sound like. That is like legit.
That's the real deal.
Her name is June, and she's chatting with Tim, the owner of the shop, about, she's like, yeah, I just don't know. I'm not sure if this is the one. He's like, June, if anyone can operate this, it's you. And I'm behind them, just kind of like creeping on the conversation, like, I feel like I want to be June when I grow up. I want to be that lady walking around town with this massive chainsaw. So I didn't want to be, I felt weird just like, hey June, can I like be your friend and hang out? So she left, and I said to Tim, like, who was that? He's like, oh, that's June. Old hippie. She used to work for the Forestry Service like back in the 60s and 70s, and she still cuts her own wood. Like June, my sister, is out in the National Forest by herself chopping down wood. That is like the quintessential Portland character I would expect to find walking the streets. Seriously.
Tell her to move to Cortland.
I know.
Yes. Okay, so this book focused on agriculture because that is essential to the area, of course. And it sounds like you were up with the farmers like every single day.
Every day.
What was your schedule like?
Oh my gosh. No sleep. Because I don't just roll out of bed. Like, it takes product to put this together. Like, it takes some time. So I would wake up. Well, to back up, when I first told the newspaper owner and Luke, the economic development guy who was writing this book, they said, all right, here's where you start. Pinky's Bar and Grill, where the farmers have coffee every morning starting at 5 a.m. Just go there. And I'm like, okay. So what I would do, and what I did to start out with, was just be there around 5 and wait for Steve and Larry Brown to come in, because they were always the first.
Yeah.
And so my day would start around 3:30. I would wake up in the morning to get ready to make sure I was the first one there, partially because I just wanted to be seated, because I knew if I like walked in, I just felt awkward about it. Like, I wanted to be in place. So I would be there when they first opened the door at 5 a.m. So it was crazy. I did not get much sleep. Because I wanted to spend as much time as possible with them, because they were like captive audience. This was their sacred coffee time. That still to this day I invade when I go back to visit.
Good. They need it.
They totally need it.
They can behave for
Well, I can tell you too. So at first I felt like, because when you're doing this, you do tend to think like, I'm kind of being a pest. I mean, really, I'm being a pest. It's early in the morning. Do these guys, I mean, keep in mind, the bar and grill is like very dimly lit at 5 a.m. and everybody's just waking up and they're already concerned about what cows loose and this and that. And the market and the weather are vexing them. So sometimes they're not in the best mood. But, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm sure they're so annoyed by my presence. So early on, there was one morning I was like, I'm just not going to go. And I got a text. Why aren't you at coffee? And that's how I knew I'm in.
You are a part of them.
I'm not a part of them.
Yeah, you're a member, whatever group that is.
Exactly.
Okay, so you said no gossip, which I love, but are there any moments that happened while you were in Cortland that just didn't make the book, but it still sticks with you?
No, everything made the book. My only regret is that I didn't have more time. I mean, at some point when you're writing a book, you gotta call it, you gotta turn it in, the manuscript. And what bums me out is, as I turned it in, is when like the brewery opened. All this stuff started happening. Audrey's came in, Pinky's closed. So there was such a huge transition that unfortunately I missed. It is included in the epilogue, but yeah. No, everybody I talked to, every conversation was included in that book, even if it was just like a 10-minute whatever with the liars on the liars bench, that got in there too.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned it a little bit, but how often do you go back?
Oh my gosh, they're stuck with me now because we're kind of relatively closer than I was in Pittsburgh. So like last year I was there 5 times. This year it's only been 2. But yeah, I love going back. You know, I also love the weird looks I get from people when they're like, I'm going on vacation to Paris. And I'm like, I'm going on vacation to Portland, Kansas. And they're like, what? But that to me is like my happy place. Like if somebody said, would you rather go to Paris for a week and go to Portland? Hands down, Portland, like every single time. It's my second home. This is my family as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you know, it's just like, there's a deep love I have for these people in this town, and so yeah, they're stuck with me.
Okay, so what, while writing this, and just in general, did you want to capture about small town America? Like what matters about small town America?
Well, just like you said earlier, that not every small town is dying, and not everybody in a small town is, you know, on meth and wants to throw themselves under the combine. Like, having come from a newspaper, I know, you know, the stereotypical if it bleeds, it leads approach to journalism and newspaper writing these days. And I just, as a writer, I started getting kind of tired of hearing like, oh my gosh, the same narrative, every single small town. Like, it's not true. It's not true at all. So I really, like you said, just wanted to capture that. Not every small town in America is dying. Like, there's actually some small towns that are doing a bang-up job, and I think way better than the major metros. And I think that there's so many more lessons that some of the bigger cities could learn from smaller towns if they would just pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely agree. So obviously, Cortland is just a place, and the people in it are what make it unique. It's so special, and it's so special to me. And so I just want to ask you, why do you think people should go to Cortland?
Oh my gosh. There's just something magical about it. Like I said, it's, you know, you go to a town that is literally 4 blocks. That's their main street. No traffic lights, of course. No stop signs. But then you've got 2 hair salons. You've got an arts center. You've got a community pool. You've got a family-owned bank. You've got a really nice restaurant, a cafe, an antique shop, a farmer's market, a boutique. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if you want to see like a small town that just is vibrant with life and soul and depth, if you like that, and if you also like just salt of the earth people that have zero pretension whatsoever, that just love their community, and I would say also if you are hip to the idea of just simplicity and not using that in a bad way, but like the beautiful art of simplicity, then Cortland is your place. You will love it. They will be stuck with you then, not just me.
Thank you for saying all of that, because again, I love Cortland. It is my hometown. I loved this book. It was very nostalgic for me to read. I had like the best time.
Thank you.
And I just told everybody else it was very nostalgic for me. I loved every moment of it. I loved getting a look into their lives, and I think you did everybody justice and the town justice, and yeah, I just really loved it. And so I'm going to turn it over to anybody that might have questions.
Yes, sir.
I love reading about the young people from Cortland that moved back to live there after maybe trying to go away. What did you learn from them, and what surprised you talking to them about their experience moving back? And did that shock you at all to know that they may be gone and found that the small town life was more for them?
Yeah, big time. I love that you asked that. So initially, again, because I was living in Pittsburgh, when you live in a city, I think the ultimate goal is just to get to like a cooler city. Like you want to be New York or Paris, wherever. And the first day I drove into Cortland, I ended up chatting with a younger girl who had said like, yeah, I just moved back from LA. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, and it wasn't Cortland. And I thought, that is so weird. Like you never hear that because LA is like the ultimate goal, right? Like where everybody wants to go. And this girl went, having lived in Cortland her whole life, and came screaming back. And so that was like really eye-opening for me. And then to also answer your question, what I love about the younger generation in Cortland is obviously most of them grew up on a farm. And most of them have decided, not for me, but I still want to do something for my community. And they just come up with like the coolest ideas. Like I said earlier, who would think you could have a brewery in a town of less than 300 people? But Luke had a dream and he made it happen. Shanna had a dream about opening up this really cute boutique, kind of like a smaller version of the one you have here, and she did it. The creative ideas that young people come up with is just phenomenal. So that's what I love most about them, is they are just endlessly creative, endlessly determined, and it's exciting to see, like how they're injecting new life into their own rural community.
Any other questions?
What's the lodging like in Cortland? Where do you stay when you're taking your trips there?
Okay, so I love answering this question because you know Cortland. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to know where you staying. Kenny George, one of my farmers, who I've become quite friendly with, he has what he calls the man cave. It's like a garage with a little apartment detached from the house. I now call it the she shed, which makes him crazy. And the man cave / she shed is decorated with Kansas Jayhawks, like everywhere. The whole decor is Jayhawk stuff. Yeah. So I have threatened to paint all the walls white and take all the Jayhawks decor out and replace it with plants. And now I've gotten people in town to like tell him that's a good idea, and he hates. So they'll ask him things like, how's the feminine fortress? How's the lady lair? And he's like, shut up. So that is where I stay. But lodging-wise, there are a ton of Airbnbs now. When I first started going, I actually stayed at Caleb Mahan's Airbnb, which was like the only one in town. Unfortunately, there's I guess Belleville has a hotel or two. It's like a chain, but there's so many Airbnbs now in Cortland. It's honestly like take your pick. In fact, my parents stayed at a beautiful one, the Snow Goose Lodge, south of town.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
When they visited Cortland for the book release party. Yes, ma'am.
So you said that Cortland has a lot of lessons to teach, but
Yeah.
what did you learn about yourself?
I learned that I'm not the super cool Sex and the City, big city girl that I envisioned myself to be 20 years ago. That I just love the simple things in life, truly. Like watching the sunrise and set, like literally being able to watch it sink down unobstructed was like, whoa, amazing. I am a Christian and I love creation. I love nature and being so close to it. Like there's nothing that keeps me from that. And so I think I came to appreciate simplicity, again, in its most beautiful form, certainly creation and nature, way more. And I also learned too that, I guess I learned about what really matters. In hindsight, my idea of spending quality time was going to Target and the mall. And now it's like, oh my gosh, so much time I wasted. these are people that when they get together, their phones aren't out on the table. They are like just in a conversation. And wow, like that was so different from anything I'd ever seen. They're not distracted by what's going on. They're just like fully present in the moment. And for me, that was like such a concept I'm getting better at, but it can be a struggle. Yes, sir.
What are the football and basketball teams like in that area?
You mean high school wise?
Yes.
I might not be the best one to answer that question. Maybe you would be, because I'm not really into the sports scene, but they are smaller. I mentioned in the book they play, is it 12-man or 8-man?
8-man.
8-man.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, what surprises me is the teams are so small. These parents will travel like serious distances for the games, which was fascinating to me because back home it's like, you know, throw a stone and you hit 10 ballparks. Whereas these people are like, yep, we'll be back in 5 hours when we get home from the football game. Like, where are you guys going? Like, oh my gosh, like 150 miles away to play a Friday night football game. But that is like my extent of their sports teams out there.
Well, with the farm kids, they should have pretty good football teams, don't they?
They should.
It depends on the year. Some years they do really good. Other years, not the best. But yeah, they drive all over. So high school football is in Scandia, so everybody from Cortland will load up and go to Scandia. And middle school basketball, there's a gym in Cortland, so we all go there. And then we don't have like softball, for example. I wanted to play softball, so I had to go to another town 15 minutes away, Belleville, and we joined up with that school. So there's a lot of that going on. We have to join up with other schools, but yeah, some years all the sports are really great.
Did they ever take state in football or basketball?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't know the years exactly, but I know they've made it to state.
Who is your big rival, or who was your big rival?
Really no one.
No
I
one?
mean, kind of Mankato, but it was never like a huge rivalry. We were all really close friends too, so
Yeah.
it's like we played against each other and then we all hung out afterwards anyway.
Like how many was in your graduating class?
25
Wow.
in my graduating class, and I was the last big class for a while, so I don't know if it's changed now, but yeah, we had 18 girls and the rest were boys. But
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
yeah, I think when I graduated high school, it was probably 86 in the whole high school.
I kind of love that though, because it keeps you accountable, you
Yeah.
know?
I think it's a great way to grow up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. It's so different from what most people experience.
I think there's a lot to be said about small schools. I think
Agreed.
a lot of good education is taking place in them.
Yeah, I agree. I love that you say that too, because I think a lot of times people like really kind of turn their nose down at smaller schools from bigger cities, when really I think that there's a lot that they could learn. And I think kids have such a unique opportunity, and things are different. Like where I live, there's a school, the 10 Commandments are still on the wall. It's a public school. You know, it's like they do things different in small towns. Yes, sir. This is my dad, by the way.
And the question isn't planted. What about the next generation of farmers? As I've met a few of these individuals, they are, I'd say, many of them my age. So what will happen next with their farmlands?
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Good question. So I would ask this repeatedly, like, because keep in mind too, as you well know, these are sometimes 5th and even 6th generation farmers. And the 6th or 7th generation per se is not a guarantee like it was in the past. So I've asked them, what are you gonna do with the family farm? And they all kind of like take the tough guy mentality, like, if anyone's stupid enough to farm, like, but you know in their heart of hearts that it's important to them. So I can tell you, while I don't know if they've figured that out, what they have figured out is they're not gonna sell to, let's say, another country. They're not gonna sell to a big corporate farm. They want that farm, if it's not gonna stay in the family, that it's gonna go to somebody they know. They wanna know who's gonna take over the land. That is definitely a conversation I've heard multiple times, which is wonderful that they have taken a vested interest and that they're willing to presumably take less money, you know, for a better ethical, you know, maintenance and stewardship of their land. So I think cost of farming is a big thing that unfortunately is just working against the younger generation. And frankly, they saw the struggles through the 80s, 90s, and even into today, and they don't want to deal with it. Farming's tough. It's tougher than I ever realized. Yes, sir.
Since your dad brought that up about farming, a couple of weeks ago I talked with a landowner about 120 miles east. And you know, they were talking about small farms aren't small farms. Medium farms are 5,000 acres.
Yeah.
You know, and I was wondering, do they have big farms like that down there where they have 4,000 or 5,000 acres per farmer?
Some of them are big, that size, but they'll say that's small. I forget which of the farmers, might have been Steve Brown, was telling me his acreage, and I was like, dang, that's a huge farm. He's like, oh, honey, that's nothing. To me, it sounded like a massive amount of acreage, but I think nowadays when you're seeing, I mean, farms that just have tens of thousands of acres, you know, if you say I have 5,000 acres, what's that? Whereas, you know, back in the day, you could make it on a quarter section and be totally fine.
Yeah, when I grew up, every quarter or every mile there was a farmstead.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing that is nice is I do think people, like especially in urban areas, are definitely starting to become more interested in small farms and becoming aware that this is something that needs support. You know, as we all, I don't want to say all of us, but a lot of people are interested in where their food came from, and they like the idea of supporting a farm, and so hopefully that helps bolster smaller farms, and of course they're all diversifying. And
is there irrigation down there?
oh yeah, there's dry land crop, but it's mainly irrigated. If you go over to Formosa, which is the next town, that's all dry crop, but most of Cortland is irrigated.
So this is kind of similar to this question, but maybe a little bit different, but what are some lessons that you learned from the community of Cortland that you feel like you're taking to the community you live now, that you live more rurally?
That's a great question. Interestingly enough, where I live, most people have the mentality that I now have and that Cortland has. Simplify, appreciate what you have, be present, do what you can to support your own area. So that's unique. I live in a pretty special place to have that. So I don't know if I'm adding anything. I'm one of the youngest of where I live for sure. So I probably have a lot more to learn from those with more wisdom than me. But yeah, I just think collectively in rural areas for the most part, and you can add to this, but I think that for the most part, people just tend to share those same values because Luke Mahan said to me early on, you know, with Cortland, everybody in the boat rows. If one person doesn't, it sinks. And I think inherently when you're in a small community, you all kind of know that. So yeah, I don't know if that's answering your question, but
These are great questions. Anyone else?
yeah, thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you again for
Thank
joining
you.
us for this. I'm so glad you got to explore Hayes a little bit as well. I'm so glad to hear that you go back to Portland. Maybe sometime we'll be there at the same time.
I would
Monday
love
or
that.
something.
I
Yeah.
will be there actually in a week. I'll be back again.
Well, I was just there last week. So
Okay.
I wanted to be back again.
I'm going to ask about you though.
Yeah.
Because I keep threatening
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sequel, so you
Just
might
call
make
them
it
Dale's daughter and they'll be like, oh, yeah, Dale. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so, thank you so much. If anybody hasn't, check out this book. We have a display over there. It's a great book. I loved it for nostalgic reasons, but it's a great book. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for coming out and for great questions, too.